Welcome, everybody. My name is Vicky Hanna, and I'm going to be taking this unit for you, CHCDIV001, Work with Diverse People. So this is a core unit across many qualifications. It's an important one so that we have an understanding around what are the legal and ethical requirements for us when we're entering into the sector. So I just want to say welcome to everybody, and I'll do our acknowledgement to country. In this spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. And these lands have never been ceded. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony and in the spirit of healing. We pay our respect to all First Nation people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. So this session is around diversity, both social and cultural perspectives around that, and how does that impact with our work and the sector that we want to work in, or that we want to gain our qualifications to be better and current and relevant and compliant. So at the end of this session, you will have a better understanding of what culture is. Society, our society and Australia is a multicultural society where we have a great deal of diversity here. But diversity is not only around where you were born. We're going to learn about the socialisation of diversity, what are the social norms, what you think is normal, what I might, and what our clients might. And what are the social roles and the classes, that hierarchy that exists in our country here where we live, work and study. We're going to talk a little about the poverty and the disadvantage, that lower socio-economic disadvantages for some members of our society. And then we're going to talk about having cultural awareness, which really frames cultural safety. And safety belongs with the language that we use, the actions that we take as well. So there's going to be a brief video for you to watch that come with these slides. So there's some extra learning. You'll get an overview of this whole unit in this one recording. So culture is about shared ideas, our thoughts, ways of doing things. This is how we do things in our family, in our community, in our state. Material items and objects where we have connection to what those things may mean, and non-material elements like the knowledge, the values, and the beliefs. So have a think about what culture may mean to you. Part of your assessment work on this is reflection, and this is about what you think. And then also as you study about this to be a sector worker and have this unit qualification, have you changed your perception around culture because you've done a little more research and grown that understanding around that as well? Having an open mindset will be very important as a worker in the sector because our clients will be representative of every culture. So it means the aspect could be a shared culture where you connect and you speak the same language, hold the same values, may even have some beliefs that you both, oh yeah, that's how we think too. Your customs or those rituals could be normal for you. That's the shared connection to a group in our community. What are the norms, the normals, and the expectations that others have in your cultural unit? Your culture first experience could be your family unit. It might be the culture in your school. It may be the schooling that you did attend. It could be your workplace culture, but it's our community as well. And then what does society produce that brings us all together, where we have a shared culture. And that might be things like public holidays. We share that culture together, even though we may hold it on different dates. Culture is a learned aspect, and it means that culture is learned as we grow up. Well, where did I get my views from? Well, that's what I've always grown up with. So there's going to be quite a lot of self-reflection in this unit for you, because it may not be your cultural norm to be working with some of the target group. This unit will prepare you for that. This unit will help you have that understanding and the qualification upon completion to be able to work with diverse members of the community. And it influences how we think and how we interpret, or the lens, our worldview that we have over different things. So if I used an example of something like football, we might all follow the same footy team. And that's our culture, that's our norm. Politics in your family unit, you might all vote the same way. That's your cultural norm in your family unit. To be working against that would be to barrack for a different footy team, or to vote for maybe a different political party. And that will be where your own reflection and your own views may stray from what is the shared culture that you have learned as you have grown up, or that you are still learning, because experiences and exposure give you a broader sense, a broader view. This unit is about that. This is about challenging our fixed views and being more open-minded about this. And there's a great deal of information in this unit. Some of the videos to watch, some of the research that you're going to do, and then of course your learning guide, which is a wealth of information. So let's have a look at our society. In Australia, society and culture are linked, very much so. Society is a group of people who share common beliefs and a way of living. So when we talk about integrating into society, it does not mean everyone has to let go of what you think, what you have grown up with, but there are social norms that we are required to do in society to be in step and feel connected to our community, especially when we're working in the sector with different members of our society. That connection and engagement, if people do not feel connected to community, then it increases the social isolation, it increases their feelings of anxiety and depression. That sense of belonging is no longer there, and it removes that hope and connection. So as a community sector worker, or going to be a community sector worker, this is one of your foundation, your core units. Culture is part of society, and society itself is part of our culture. So when it gets to the research and the reflection part of your assessment, your written assessment and your role play, your skills assessment, think about where you came from, what your views are, and reflect upon whether any of those perhaps have changed. It's part of your assessment work, is to do that reflection piece and see if anything has come forward for you. Okay, so socialization is, it teaches us how to be members of our own society and culture, imitating behaviours and attitudes of those around us. It's a learned behaviour. And then our family is often our primary key form of information on how we socialise, what are our norms. So it's often our very first unit that influences us. Another unit that influences us can be media. Another unit can be your very first experience if you went to school. Then school could be your mini practice run on what it's like to be in a community. And in your school, you would have had different groups, certain people that you connect with, and then other people that perhaps maybe you have not. So social norms vary from culture to culture. And so in your family, you may know all the way back to your family history, and a lot of those stories will come forward from generation to generation. That will be, this is our family story. It may vary according to what those roles are. Sometimes that can be gender, sometimes that can be education, sometimes that can be sexual identity. It depends on what those social culture roles are in your worldview and your family. And if they aren't something that is in step with that, then it isn't necessarily right or wrong. It's right or wrong for that person. And so as people become older, they may form their own social norm and then have that imprint back in their family unit. But those very early years, it does strongly influence where our beliefs come from. And when we're in this state, when we're in this pace as a worker, we have to reflect on what is my bias, my lens, what I think is right for me, and then to make sure that we aren't working with an unconscious bias, seeing something that is different to what we know and trying to get that to look like what we do so it makes sense for us. We need to meet our clients where they are, and to do that, we have to have a greater understanding. So they do vary from generation to generation. What was considered normal 50 years ago will not be considered as normal in the culture. Not right, not wrong, different. So the social classes, society is often arranged by hierarchies, who gets access to things and who may not. There are vulnerable members of our community. Often where we work as a sector worker is with the most marginalised people in our community. Some people have a higher status or social position. Who gets to decide that? Society does. How power, privilege, rewards, and obligations are distributed amongst everybody in our society, and what are the divisions between the richest and the poorest members of society. Some of your research will take you into your local area, your local postcode, perhaps where you're going to be working as a worker, to know what is the demographic of your local area. And then how does that compare with the national picture as well? Do you have more people from English as another language? Do you have more First Nation people? Do you have more or less people who have been university educated? Do you have more or less people there who have got trades? So get to know what is happening in your local area, because likely that will be where you work. Your qualifications will take you anywhere because they're recognised Australian, they're a national recognised qualification. However, when you are working in a community, you need to know what your community is made up of. And if you haven't looked, this unit will have you researching some of that as well. So poverty and disadvantage can often remove people away from having access to the services that other people who do not struggle socially or economically or psychologically or physically. So it can be very absolute, extreme poverty or destitution. Everything starts with shelter, homelessness, housing and homelessness, sustainable housing, shelter, food, clothing, safety. They are at the absolute very beginning, at the base of our Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The work that we do with our clients, nothing starts until those things are there. And there's a lot of inequity and disadvantage in that as well. So it can be either relative or comparative, less income or assets to others. So absolute poverty and disadvantage would be extreme. Then it could be a lower income. Then it's generational, around affecting more than one generation who have had that hardship. It's very hard to work your way out of poverty if you have been disadvantaged, or if you are an identified disadvantaged group in our community. And the work that you do as a worker will definitely put you there. and that understanding around your cultural awareness and cultural safety in when we're talking about culture with our clients. So be aware of your own culture and then also of others. That's what empathy is. I can put myself in your position. I don't have to have lived that. I don't even have to know how hard that may be, but I do have to want to know that that must be hard and acknowledge that. We can recognize the differences, the cultural sensitivities on how to approach and work with those clients, and then to ask honest questions and understand those cultural differences. It's okay if you don't know, it's okay to ask. And how we ask needs to be done in a respectful and culturally aware way. In Australia, we have laws around discrimination, and that's what diversity highlights, the differences in people. We'll cover that. So developing cultural awareness and cultural sensitivity, which is that empathy, that unconditional regard, our compassionate inquiry when we're in this space. After all, we're learning a unit around working in the sector, and sector workers have that balance of social, psychological, emotional well-being when we work there. So admit what you do not know. Develop an awareness of your own views. Look, I'm coming from this space, and that's probably not enough information. I haven't had that experience, and I need to go and get more. That's what this unit will help you with. Take an interest, a curiosity, and compassionate inquiry to learn to better understand, an interest in other cultures, and don't judge. So when we work in this space and we write in an assessment, we are non-judgmental. That's an action, and an action leads to an understanding, and an understanding leads to connection, and connection leads to trust. And to be a worker that people trust is our primary goal, always in this space. So check ourselves. What are my assumptions? What do I know? Do I make a decision quickly, or do I wait until I have more information? The reason why we press this is because there's a lot of reflection in this space. Where did I get my information from? What do I know about my family unit? What is your story? Some of your clients will not have that family imprint, or they have left that because it was unsafe for them to do so. Some people do not have connection to their family. Some people don't know who they are and where they fit in when they're not in that same family unit again. So the role that we play is often filling an unmet need and a gap in a service. However, to build connection, to get that understanding so that people will work with us, we need to have the empathy around that and to just check our own assumptions. I see, oh, I know. We know only as much as we know. And this unit gives us an opportunity to really do a deep dive into this space. So let's have a look a little more around what those cultural differences might be. So for you to be culturally competent, understand, communicate, and interact effectively across all cultures and all demographics, all ages, all mental health and well-being, all physical diversity as well. Some differences are invisible, so we need to make that connection. What way will best help this client? Our cultural awareness is about diversity, open to ongoing learning, not having a fixed mindset, and then reflect on our own attitudes and beliefs. I'm culturally aware because I'm open-minded to learn about differences. So culture consists of language, identity, relationships, and obligations. In some family units, there's the head of the house, or there's different generations might live in that house. The obligations, this is what we must do, and that changes from different cultures and different family stories. What are the individual differences inside a collective, a family, or a community? There can be some people who don't feel connected, even though they are in a family unit, because of what those individual differences might be. what's some knowledge around that, being open to building bridges, making connection, is to learn more or listen to understand. What is our exposure or our experience? What is the dignity? How can we ensure that there's dignity in that space when we are working with our clients? And then the culture, that story. All of these things make up culture. So it's complex. It's not just we see one thing based on clothing or language or differing abilities. There's so much more that goes into that tapestry of what culture really is. So when we're reflecting on cultural perspectives, let me just move that for you. Here is a tip for your assessment. Consider your own story. What is your experience with different cultures and diversity? How do you make reasonable adjustments to ensure that others are included? That's your inclusivity. Opening that circle wider for others to enter in. And have you ever needed to have adjustments made for you where at times you have been unable to access support and services for some reason, some barrier was there, or a perceived barrier was there, or perhaps you know of someone who has? When we're doing our assessments, consider this formula: who, what, how, when, where, and why. If you put that into the depth of any of your reflection or your research, and you get that from your own story, or you get evidence, references and links to support that when you're doing your research project, you will have framed that to make sure that you've been inclusive. You've considered all areas around that. Journalists do it. It's a formula. It's a learned skill for community sector workers. It's in our written work. Have I put all the information in here? When you're doing your assessment, you think, oh, I'm not sure if I've got enough, if I've covered it all. Ask yourself that. And that's your study assessment tip. Make sure that you frame it. Now, all of those words are open-ended question starters. So when we're communicating, we will come at that with like, how did you learn about this? Oh, what's your background like? The who, what, the what, the how, the when, the where, and why. It frames everything we do around diversity. And this means that we are listening with active listening to really understand, that we have motivational interviewing questions, because we want to find out all of that information that we can to best be able to come out of a place of service for our clients, and for our clients to feel that they can trust us in this space. What is the impact of mainstream culture and social structures on diverse groups? It can be inherited from British and European social institutions, which Australia, from the moment it became colonised, it came where the British used Australia as a penal colony, because the prisons were overcrowded. So put onto ships, there were 12, put onto these ships and sent out where there was considered plenty of room. There was a nation and a culture already living here, and this will form part of your assessment as well. Not the only thing though, because Australia is very multicultural, and it has a very rich history around that. So you may know your family story, your family culture. I know that what mine is, and but that's a discovery. Usually it's other members of the family who will tell me about that. It isn't something that I went looking for. It was really just a matter of, like, I just took that as our norm. Someone told me, therefore it must be. It isn't until we start to explore that for ourselves and go, oh, right. Okay. So what lens am I using? Is that mine, or is that something that I have been given? And what if I take that off and I try on this? When you're a community sector worker, any of your original beliefs, your own norms, you may have to park those at the door when you step into this space to ensure that you are meeting the community service practice standards around what is diversity and how do we do that in a legal and ethical manner in our work. So other cultures may not feel part of mainstream, that European white Australian story, which is not Australia's story. It's part of Australia's story and it's an amazing story. I'm part of that, but I'm very aware that there's other stories as well. And marginalised, devalued and disadvantaged if we are not accepted into that culture. If we are outliers, outsiders, think about what that might be like for you in that space. Okay, let's pause. Great, brief break and we're back. It's a lot to cover in one recording, so I hope you just took a moment and stretched your legs, took the first part of information in. So we're breaking this down into 3 short sessions for you, and then you'll have some extra videos as well to have a look at. Okay, so we're still covering CHCDIV001, work with diverse people. So session 2, we're going to break down a little bit more around diversity in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So you'll notice that on my screen, I have that I live, work and play on Tarrabaland Bunda, but there's several lands where I live. So there's Garangarang, there's the Balai people. I live in regional Queensland, and Tarrabalang Bunda is often referred to as Bundaberg. But I put my First Nation name there because that is me acknowledging that I live, work and study and play on First Nation land. So the diversity and the differences around First Nation people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, is there are many different lands and hundreds of languages that has never really been studied. Your introduction may be similar to mine, where I had an education where I was not given any background knowledge or information other than the version from the European, the Western society education. So I didn't learn about the diversity in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people till I was much older. And then it was through those social norms, the cultural exposure. Again, that lens was a little blurry because I still didn't have any information. I only had what I saw, and there's so much more to learn as well. So we'll have a look at what are stereotypes and how others stereotype. The cultural diversity in Australia, the other diversities in Australian society, and the work practices in diversity and how that forms part of our law, our legislation, our legal and our ethical. Ethical is your intention to do the right thing. And you can sometimes have dilemmas because of some kind of bias, whether it's known or unknown, that others may have towards you, or that you might have something sitting there that you're going to explore to be a fair and equitable person in the sector. There's a couple of short videos that's going to come out with this. I won't show them because I'm recording. However, they will come with your resources as well. So assumptions are based often on the visible differences, what people see, and then what we think. So we look through our lens, we have something make sense, and we bring that back to us to form opinions. So when we assume all members of a group with similar characteristics are the same, that can be a bias or a stereotyping, and prejudice and discrimination sits inside that closed thinking. I know that sometimes what can be the things that are saying, I might jump into a room where everybody's wearing glasses. That's the thing that connects us. That's shared characteristics if we're looking for something. Skin colour can be one, though we can't make assumptions and think that we have anyone's heritage around that. So when someone says, where did you come from? That means your place of origin could actually be in exactly the same hospital in the bed next to yours when you were born. Because we look different, we can't have those assumptions layered over that. So never jumping to assumptions that everyone has their story, their cultural norms in their family as well. So have a think about what is your lens over this. What is your knowledge over this? You may have some, but this might be very new for you as well. So Indigenous people and cultures before 1788, Australia was inhabited by Indigenous people and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. 500 different clan groups or nations, 2.4% of total Australian population is First Nation people. However, that can be higher in some areas that are populated areas around Australia. It's greater than that where I live, greater than 2.4%. So get to know what's happening in your local area and if that is going to be a cultural group that you work with. Migration to Australia, it started with the gold rush. So when it wasn't the prisoners who were here to serve sentences, the convicts, from the 1850s, a lot of people came to Australia for the gold rush. Immigration Restriction Act happened in 1901, and in came the White Australia policy. With that came policies, procedures, and actions by the governments of the day. And there's quite a history, a damning history around the decisions that those people made of that time and how that has impacted, like war impacts people. Then it was a civil war that happened in Australia against the first inhabitants. So cultural diversity in Australia is around multiculturalism. We can't look at our present if we don't have a good understanding about our history. And really, it's about acknowledging, it's not about feeling bad about something that you had no say in or no stake in. But we really must remember that every family has its social norms and its cultural stories. We need to be aware of that when we're working in this space, especially when we're working with a culture that we may not have a lot of information. We need to go and get that. So there's races, minority groups, special acknowledgement of those differences. We do acknowledgement to country at HADA because we acknowledge that we are living, working and studying on these lands. However, we are a very diverse registered training organisation. We have gender differences, we have cultural differences, we have people who have different learning reasonable adjustments that are in the workplace. We are actually a very representative of the cultural diversity in Australia, just our own team, very much so. That may be the case for you as well. It may be your family story, but it may be your community story where you're going to work in the sector. So what impact does that have on society, those diversities? It changes decade by decade, government by government, and they change laws and legislations around that. Some of those decisions are great, and some of those decisions, in hindsight, they could see that maybe that has created a problem, a bigger problem they were trying to solve or thought they were trying to solve was a problem. And that usually comes from not knowing enough yet. So the impact of diversity on society, it does affect politics, the social economic standing, the cultural life, the foods, the customs, the music, the dwellings, how we adapt to changes and the challenge that that can mean. And then what are the economic benefits of us opening up? And this isn't about population. This is about the richness and understanding, that harmony space that we sit in there. So it's hard enough for vulnerable people to reach out and ask for help in the first place. We can't be the barrier for them as well when we're stepping into that role as a worker. I'll let you watch those recordings. So other diversities in Australian society may include, but this isn't just an exhaustive list of it could be our religious diversity in Australia. What does it consist of? Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Judaism, and no religion or secular beliefs. How do we know this? We do a census every 4 years. Where do we get that data from? From the people who themselves are filling in that information. So we know what the demographic is of our Australian society on that one period of time where we gather all that data and we bring that together. So the Australian Bureau of Statistics, or ABS site, is where you will get a lot of information about what does make up this picture, this culture in Australia. And then what was my lens like? Have I got a smaller lens because I grew up in a smaller place and maybe that was our normal there? I grew up around a lot of Europeans when I was a younger person, where Greeks and Italians were relatively new coming into Australia, and English as another language was common because cultural connection and cultural social norms were applied. Some people learn other languages. I work in the NDIS psychosocial support space as well, and I work with a 7-year-old who is non-verbal in English but speaks 7 other languages. So it's about me getting into that world, his world, and being able to help him have an understanding, to put some language around the things that help him get his needs met, to have a greater understanding, connection, and that's where we are here. So we're building bridges, and we're not making judgment calls because we work in a professional setting. We have professional boundaries. We follow the law of the land, which is non-discriminatory. And in Australia, it is against the law or unlawful to discriminate against anyone because of their religion, their beliefs, and their cultural differences as well. And there's the legal and the ethical. When you move into an organisation, your policies and your procedures will guide you, but what overarches everything is the law. And I'll take you into a site called the Human Rights Commission to give you some understanding. You will need that for your research project, for your assessment. Then there's differing abilities, physical, cognitive, so that's neurological, sensory, behavioural, and communication. Empowerment to make own choices and decisions is how we ensure that we have cultural safety and inclusivity when we're dealing with people who have diverse needs. Gender, there is gender diversity, gender and sexual diversity in Australia, so sexual identity, gender equality in Australia, and generational diversity as well. These are the stories that get handed down from one member of the family to another. And you might in your family have heard some stories about different members of your family. It may even be that you are referred to as you're just like your aunt, or you're just like your uncle, or you're just like your grandfather. That can be a positive thing, or it could be a negative thing for you. So your social norm starts with your own worldview. So some we learn and some we will put to one side and expand. We'll keep some of that, which feels right for us, and we may put some things aside and replace that with new learnings and new understanding and beliefs around it as we become an adult and make our own decisions in that space. So we have work practices and diversity. We need to make what we refer to as reasonable adjustments for people. So if you've got someone who's a wheelchair user, then the height of the desk will need to be modified. Access into shops, office fronts, accessing the amenities, all those things in our law, to make sure that we have inclusive work practices and that nobody is discriminated against because of their differences. We have a culture in our workplace about we value certain things, that we have professional, respectful practices in our language and our actions, and we promote cooperation, and we do that through our policies and our procedures and our awareness and how we connect and bring our team together around that. So we might celebrate different holidays, seasons as well. Their ways. We might have different food and get a learning and an understanding. There's ways that we can build that bridge. So with your assessment, part of this is there is research for you to do. What regulations, standards, or the acts apply to support culture and diversity in the workplace? And you will need to research at least 2. So have a think about which differences around diversity and select 2, culture and diversity, and then apply that in the workplace and research that and put your reference on where you found that information. Work practices are around training skills and knowledge, organisations, policies and procedures, the protocols that we practice, and then the legislative framework, which is the law that is overarching of everything. We must do this because that's a requirement. And here we have laws to protect people who are vulnerable, who may not have access where others, and that they cannot be disadvantaged because of those differences as well. So it's something for you to dig a little deeper. Skills and strategies, how do we do that? How do we develop our skills and come up with different approaches to be able to do this? By learning more, raising awareness or raising our own, looking at other people's attitudes, checking our own, and then how do we culturally communicate in a safe way? Because storytelling and language is also a safety matter. We might see hazards like workplace health and safety, wet floor frame, we might have that there. Stop might be a bridge that we build to communicate that crosses cultures to get communication there. But then there's also subtle ways of communicating. And because we may think something is a joke, if it is not welcomed and received in that same manner, then it is unlawful to do that in the workplace. So we need to raise awareness. Gosh, I didn't think of it like that. I'm sorry. I'll be more mindful of that in the future. Because you're required to, as a sector worker, ensure that you meet those sector worker practice standards. So in this is a reflective case study, and your learner's guide, you'll have some as well, but you'll have case studies and you're going to do some research around this in your assessment piece. So you can do this case study if you want to as a stepping off point. So this one here talks about a person joining a team in the workplace, and they're an administrative role, and they're short of stature to be able to perform the role, and that's a diagnosis, so that's a diversity. So this person's name is Riley, and to do all of the tasks required, which they have the knowledge, skills and ability, the workplace must accommodate them as well. So that's accessing computers, taking calls, setting appointments, Riley being short stature syndrome, which can limit his physical abilities during his role if he is not adequately supported in the culture and provided all of the resources to be able to do that job. That is law. And then making that safe for Riley to have those differences. So as it is a syndrome, it's a medical diagnosis. Often it can be a developmental thing, a physical difference, rather than the lens over it, that view of, gosh, that person is short or that person is really tall. These are things completely outside of somebody's control. So we're stating the obvious compared to what, though? So our responsibility with Riley is to make sure that if Riley on paper and all things are fair and equal, and we have equity around that, which is what our laws state we must, we have Discrimination Act to make sure that everyone's rights are protected, that Riley has everything that Riley needs to be able to do that job, and the workplace must accommodate some of those. Riley is the best person to be able to say, here are the things that make it easier for me, and collaborate and work with Riley on how to make that work so Riley can go in and do the work that Riley was hired to do. And Riley then takes their rightful place in that culture, in that workplace. And then Riley's rights are respected and valued and applied. So by the end of this particular session, we will have looked at what would be appropriate terminology, the history, the Indigenous Australian culture. Indigenous means original persons of the land. So you might hear Indigenous in America would be Indigenous Native Indians. In New Zealand, Indigenous would be the Maori. So Indigenous to Australia are Aboriginal, and then also the islands joining were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, the legal and the ethical considerations around that. Closing the gap between the haves and the have-nots and the differences. The trauma, there is definitely generational trauma. Anyone that goes through a traumatic event may not be able to heal effectively. That would be post-traumatic stress disorder. However, they may not have PTSD, but they do have an imprint, and trauma forms part of their story, their cultural story. And then the legal system and the laws that sit around that as well. So let's have a look at the history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. So 1788 to 1890 was referred to as the invasion because those lands were taken by force. And then the colonisation is when the prisoners were sent here because the prisons were full in England. You may know something about your family history or someone else's family history that's close to you that may have links to that era of time. Assimilation started in 1937, where that was trying to get the connection between the differences over those that century there. The protection and the segregation that was around 1890s all the way through to 1950s, where there were taps that people would drink out of that only white people could drink out of and dark-skinned people could not. There were places in eating places that only certain people could eat in certain areas. That was not that long ago. Even as late as the 70s, that was still common practice in some areas. The bigger the area, the greater the diversity, the less resistance to that because people assimilate and move with those changes. But if it's closed thinking, closed areas, smaller, not going outside of the things that are the social norms, that may be slower being adopted into what is normal. There may even be some resistance to that. So depending on where you live, where you work and where you study, it's good to know about your story locally, and then what the demographic is. In Tarrabalane Bunda and in Bundaberg, there is also a very high population of Italians who came here to be the cane cutters as well. So there's a lot of history. Cane is a big thing in Bundaberg. From the cane comes Bundy rum. And then, of course, it's a large farming area. So there were a lot that were brought over from the islands who did a lot of work as well. That was slave labour. And that's the history. That's our local knowledge that sits there. So the reconciliation that started in the 1990s, that we're still working our way through that takes time. It can take centuries, many generations as well. But the integration and self-determination and self-management happened from 1967. So there's some misinformation that comes down through as well, often through the media, or a story gets maybe misinterpreted, and then it waters down a story, and then by the time it ends up with someone else, it becomes your truth, your normal, until you do a unit specifically like this, where you find out for yourself and you do the research, and you may be surprised about some of the things that is recent times, that there is not a lot of growth around the reconciliation, the closing of the gap there. And that is finding the things that we are similar about. That's what assimilation is, rather than respecting the differences, because those two things can be true. Those two things can coexist if we have an open mind and we're not judgmental or discriminatory in that space. When you are dealing with clients, that you as a sector worker must have that lens over that space. That will be your professional position, and it will be required of you in the workplace. So if you struggle with that, this unit will help you resolve some of those, gosh, I didn't know that, and fill some of those gaps around knowledge for you as well, which I think is really valuable. Do a little more research. These PowerPoint slides come to you as well, so I'll guide you there. What are some of the key elements? The dreamings, that's around the language, land, family law, ceremony and language, and law, L-O-R-E, which is the stories that get handed down from family members to family members. Land and connection to country is very important with Indigenous Australian cultures, and family is referred to as kinship. And it came from there. The original term, kinship placement, came from that clan, that mob, that tribe as well. But it's often referred to in the child protection sector around a kinship placement of someone going into a family member rather than going into an institution or into foster care. So the institutions, the homes, they all shut down in like late 1968 when they started to move people out of that. The foster system came up. They're also finding and connecting with other family members. That all started to happen after 1968. So then moving into the 70s, people were removed from their homes, from their lands, and placed into clusters, which were called missions. And so there are missions around Australia that the politicians of the time, if kids were out playing and they didn't look like the social norm for them, they would just go and scoop them all up, put them in a truck, take them away from their family and put them into residential places. They would pick up the adults and then they would separate those as well and put them into areas where they'd be mixing with people that they aren't part of that clan or that tribe. So with the hundreds of language and hundreds of different clans, just selecting something would not be an asset to them. It actually is a deficit of taking away the right to choose. And then it started to erode, and the trauma and the mental health and the impact of that is a whole group of our community who are not connected to their land, not connected to their story, not connected to their family as well. and learning about this helps us be better understanding and inclusive and aware of the diversity. So some of the key elements to think about is that not all law is written down. Elders are often used for decision making. Often it'll be going up to an elder, woman to woman, man to man. That will be the social norm. The ceremonies, the functions that bring a community together, and then the language, the values, the beliefs that are embedded. A lot of the First Nation language sits around storytelling, art, connection, song and dance as well. So when you go and travel, or if you've ever looked at different documentaries that show you different countries, there's often different dance, music and food that give identity to different countries. So some countries have their national dance and their national costume. And then I want you to reflect on what is the national dance, the national costume, and the national food for Australia, or did that come from somewhere else? And are we a mix of everything? The one thing that we know for certain is that the First Nation people do have their national songs, their national dance, and their food as well, which is their cultural beliefs, and that's been handed down for greater than 65,000 years. Australia is a very young country for white Australia. When we started to bring in the colony, so we are a young country, and of course where different generations have seen lots of different things happen. We walk beside others in those changes. They're the things that we share together, and they can also be our cultural things that make us connected, because we lived through an era. We may have had a different experience, but it's a meeting of the minds. So what are the issues that impact Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people? Is colonisation. We cannot erase that. The policies and the practice that happened during that time, and the difficulties because we denied access to proper health services in that period of time, and a lot of those physical disabilities were passed down from generation to generation as well. So likely to live in poverty, being disadvantaged, and the assimilation not really effective, that decisions made about Aboriginal First Nation people and Torres Strait Islanders were often made by non-Aboriginal Torres Strait Island First Nation people. Likely to be incarcerated because they're out of step with what society thinks is normal, and then less likely to complete secondary education to year 12. And we know that the greater education, the more access to services and your rights, and you as a community sector worker will help build that bridge and close that gap. What are some of the barriers in the way? Lack of trust based on past experience. If another worker did not have somebody feel that they were heard, welcome, and acknowledged in that space. Negative experiences with authority in the past. Experiences of racism and discrimination. What are the economic barriers, and then competing priorities and obligations? What is that social norm? To have an understanding, I know that I have attended meetings and I'll think that I have made an arrangement with a First Nation program, and I think I've walked away from it waiting for them to come back to me, the decision sitting with them. That's my social norm. I had to learn that that the conversation itself is the deal is done, and that then they're waiting for us to put those things in place. Now, I learned that, but I didn't know that. And that's the same as our own lens that we look through things. It's what we have learned, but there may be things that we do not know. I was fortunate that First Nation people helped me understand that and explain that. And it was a mystery to me. I didn't understand why. I thought, oh, they must not be interested. But it wasn't that at all. It was, we didn't have that communication to get an understanding of how that cultural communication, what that meant, what my role would be in that, and how they perceived their own. So it was a misunderstanding, and it was a bridge that I went back and rebuilt, but we lost an opportunity to work collaboratively together because I didn't know enough before I went into that space. We circled back and we made it stronger and better, of course, but I was surprised about my ignorance in being able to communicate that, because I felt it was enough that I was open-minded and respectful, but I didn't realize that there's actual traditions and customs and norms. And so that's that deeper understanding that you as a sector worker, it wasn't until I became a sector worker and this unit in particular, to help us better understand how we can close the gap. So how do we respond in a very severe critical incident or a distressing event in somebody's life? How we may hinder their ability to cope if we don't have that, the feelings of helplessness if we aren't able to assist, and the impact on the individual's ability to feel emotions and experiences if we do not respond in a trauma-informed way. So we first of all must acknowledge there is trauma. Then we can apply a certain approach around that to make sure that we are not the barrier standing in the way of the client that we're working with. So what brings connection? Living near, on or near traditional lands. Where do you come from? What are your lands? Where are your people? And I ask that of people that I come across now. Where is your connection to country? And then pressing on cultural practices. Living in a self-determining community means making own decisions about own life. We want that for ourselves. Why would we not respect and acknowledge that? That is what equity and non-discriminatory practice is. Strong family connections and networks, participating in cultural practices, connection to country and culture, a sense of belonging, which is something that we all on some level crave, and then being socially connected. So we want that for ourselves, and then we apply that in our workplace as well. Not our needs, but the needs of our client, and having that understanding. So how do we address the disadvantage and marginalisation? Good policy, making sure that when we do case plans that our clients are part of it, it is their plan, and our skill is to make sure we've got the best individual support plan around what are the priority of needs for the person themselves. Our role is to walk beside them to make sure that those supports are there. Decisions about the services they need, we call that priority of need. You will do some risk assessment as well, and that will come from your knowledge and your skills, but recognising and valuing and using those skills in this space as a strength, the capability of others to make decisions that impact their own lives, the resilience, the agility of a group or a community when they come together, there's value in that. And then working to reverse any negative stereotyping and imaging, being very mindful. Look around your room. Are all my posters one type of family unit? We see it in media. We bring those things in so that we have acknowledgement of the diversity, and then also to be mindful of someone can't be what they can't see. So it's very obvious to someone that this room, like Riley starting in the workplace, is not designed for a person of short stature. There's not been consideration, and making sure that we fill that gap and provide support as well. So the resources and strategies that we would apply, our resources and strategies sit around unconditional regard and respect, following the law, the legal and the ethical, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander control over the decisions around their own culture because they have that history and understanding they are the experts in their own areas and fields, the same as what you may be the expert in your own, but we are not the client. We are there as the support worker. our interpretation and the integrity that we take into that space. And then there can be secret business that only certain people can hear because they are part of that belonging, and the confidentiality around that. So when we do our privacy and confidentiality statement, when we meet and greet somebody in that space, and they're our practice standards, we need informed consent. And that means we have to explain what it is that we're going to do, and that we need their consent to do that. Even to discuss it. Just because somebody comes in through the door does not mean that they are necessarily there because they chose to be. It may be a requirement that they're there, and we need to be mindful of that and still make that safe. That decision may have been made by somebody else, but for us, the decision we make is about building bridges and closing gaps, and being lawful and ethical as a community sector worker. And that's our recap on our session 2. So I'll stop sharing there for a moment and we'll take a brief break. Okay, we're back, and this is our session 3. So I've broken this down into 3 parts for us, just to give you that break to absorb some of the information. I know it's a big unit for you, and it is condensed in the recording. So when we do those brief pauses, that's your chance to get up and stretch and stop, and know that that particular content will be relevant in the first session for your first task, your assessment. The second part will be your second part of your assessment, a task 2, and then the third part, this part will be around your task 3. And help you with some of that, breaking down your assessment, your written and your skills assessments for these. So let's have a look at session 3. I'm going to show you what some of those assessments are as well as part of your recording, so that you've got a full capsule around this whole unit to be able to take. You'll have this in a recording to play back, and that's your resource to be able to refer to as well. So we're still working on CHCDIV001, the ethic and the law around this, the codes of ethics and codes of practice. You will have access to a simulated workplace dashboard. When we're in an organisation, often we will have all our policies and procedures in one place. You will also have that. Yours is called First Access. It's a hypothetical organisation. You have policies and procedures. You'll have a staff login. You will be able to have a look at different services. There'll be templates in there for you to do case plans. You don't have to invent any of those things for yourself. There will be assessment pieces to guide you, which will give you clear instructions on how to do that. And then, of course, you'll have your study sessions that you can book in with us as well, so that we can bring some of that together if you need that, and we'll run that around assessment work primarily to help you. So what are some of the anti-discrimination laws and the guidelines for diversity in Australia? Every state and territory can have their own, but if it's a federal or a Commonwealth law that we're thinking of, then that will apply to every area that's governed by the laws of Australia as well. So everyone in the workplace has the right to be treated fairly and the responsibility to treat others fairly. So rights on the flip side is responsibility, and these are mutual obligations. So we enter into that together. So you have the right to be treated respectfully, and you have the responsibility to return that to others that you work with. And that can be your clients, that can be your colleagues, that can be your management, that can be the stakeholders that we partner with. It is Australian law, and it is the legal and ethical requirement of all community sector workers. That's our practice standards that we work to. So employers, workers, and clients, everybody has that right. and needs and rights. So human right is you are born with universal rights. Now, a tip, this is in your assessment, so it's important to be able to go through your learner's guide and do a little bit more research. One of your questions is around the universal rights, the United Nations, where Australia is a signatory to that. Human needs and human rights, the fulfillment of basic needs, which if you refer to Maslow's hierarchy of need, it starts with shelter. In session 1, we spoke a little about that. So the fulfillment of getting those basic needs met, and we can't have that if there is lack of access, fairness or equity. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights are the basis for the laws and protections of any country that is a signatory to that. So that is a question in your assessment. So it'd be really great if you do a deep dive there. So what exactly is discrimination? It is to single out a person or a group to treat them unfairly so that they are disadvantaged and given an unfair advantage as they belong to a particular group or a particular characteristic about that person. I wanted to mention here as well that discrimination can also give someone a greater access over someone. It's not always where it's a deficit. It can actually be viewed as an asset. That is still discrimination. So think about the word favoritism, or I'll let that slide be coarse. We can't do that. The Act covers everybody's rights and the responsibility applies to everybody. When we work in the sector, working in organisation and your qualification, there's an expectation that you know and you understand this and that you will abide by that. That is your lawful requirement to do so. So discrimination can be for a lot of things. There is no cap to discrimination. The discrimination legislation is very clear on this. It's age, disability, race, sex, sexual orientation, religion. Australia's anti-discrimination laws, it's unlawful to discriminate against another person based on any of those matters that are listed, and I want you to do your research there. So some of the information will be in your learner's guide. Some will come from our discussion here. Some will come from the videos that come with the resource. And there's a percentage there that you are going to go looking for. Pick a credible source, something that you go, you know what, that's evidence-based data, not just off a Facebook group. Okay, so when you work in the sector as a professional, you need to be able to back that up with, I got my information from here, from this source, and here is the link that validates that that is credible and reliable. So what is a breach of human rights? It's dealt with through the courts and tribunals. So there's a couple of other branches. We have the Industrial Relations, we have the Human Rights Commission, and we have the Mental Health Tribunal. There's a few that sit around in that space as well. So some are civil and some are criminal matters. That's where a tribunal, if they believe, and the recommendation is there that it really, a criminal offence has taken place where someone has been harmed, it may be referred to a criminal investigation. But a lot of this sits in the civil. It still comes with penalties, financial, it still comes with a record around it. It can damage the reputation of an organisation or a worker if they breach these laws. So the laws are clear, and then the Australian Human Rights Commission as well is where you will get your information from there. So the rights and responsibilities of workers, employers and clients. So you have the right as a worker to feel safe and be given the resources that you need to do your job. There will be certain conduct that you need from your clients as well. However, you know, you have to do your risk assessment, and your workplace will give you policies and procedures to be able to make a decision about whether this is our ethical practice, our code of conduct. What are our protocols around this? Is this an incident or is this a reasonable adjustment? So if you're not sure, you'll have a line manager that you can talk to, but go on to the First Access site, you'll have access to that, and then investigate your internal policies and procedures. If you work in the sector already, you may know that. You may be working somewhere where they have their own policies and procedures, but the policies and procedures cannot be in conflict with the legislation or the laws of that land. You cannot be asked to do something that is unlawful or unethical. And so you need to understand what are the two differences there. So the human rights, the service standards and the codes of practice, which you'll get out of your First Access site. The legislation must be written into your policies and procedures and make sense when you're actually asked to do that on the ground. And then things such as recruiting staff, that it's fair employment. So we have Fair Work Australia is the site that you can go to for some research. Diversity employment. So there might be certain groups that are asked to apply because they have that language or they have that understanding, that lived experience. So if the funding and the services actually being given the authority to run those programs, then it's a requirement for the funding, or the government or the law will require that we put the most suited persons to that. Now, I work with the target group, which is all diversity. The thing that brings them into the target group outside of my role here with HADA is the ages of those people, regardless of their culture. However, I might say to someone, do you have a support person that you would like to have with you while we are covering what our program is like and the services, so that you feel supported and understood? Now, some people will go, no, I don't need it. And some people will go, oh, I don't know, I've never had that. Can I help you find that? As a person who's a JP, I might have different people from different cultures come to have documents signed off. If there's a language barrier, they may bring a support person with them. However, we need to be very mindful, is this support person influencing them to make a decision that may not be to their advantage? So when you are a JP, you're an officer of the court. I am an officer of the court. Anyway, when I go in for those court dates as a court advocate, so we have to make sure that nobody's rights are being misused or coercive control in there. So to do that respectfully, we need to be able to say, this is great. For this, I need to have an interpreter to make sure that the person fully understands. And so an interpreter will ensure that what that person says is what you are acting on of their own free will. Rather than someone's interpretation of what that person said, because they may have their own bias coming in, or it may advantage them to be doing that. And that would be those biases that we're talking about. So you as a community sector worker may be required to have brochures with other languages, access to that. Sometimes even when we're doing recordings for classes, you can get your recording and put transcripts up if you need that to better understand, and you can put that in another language as well. So there's a lot of resources out there to make sure that people are giving informed consent when they're doing something, and that the full understanding is there as well. So they're resources we may need. So they're our policies and procedures. We might have a process for people who can make a complaint and give corrective feedback if they do not believe that they have been treated fairly according to your policies, procedures, and the lawful requirements. So the legislation is implemented, that means applied through your policies, procedures, and the practices of all workers. If we are employed or we are a volunteer, we are required to work within the organisation's policies and procedures if it is lawful for us to do so. That is our contract and that is our agreement. So there's a case study there for you to be able to have a look around. The worker is planning to bring their partner to a social event for the workplace outside of work. However, it is a same-sex partner. And so the employer wants to have the employee not bring the partner because of the perception that may have for the organisation. I'll leave that with you to decide, is that lawful? Is it unethical? Is it discrimination? And where is that person's right and responsibility in that conversation with an employee, if it is something that the workplace organised? And that's where the responsibility sits. So I'll leave that with you as something to have a think about. But the reputation and overall look, just because that is stated, does not mean that that is lawful. The employer isn't a figure of authority, but they cannot ask you to do something that is unlawful or unethical. So we need to have understanding and a non-discriminatory approach. So we communicate that. So when we say something, how does the other person receive it? Did they get the message as we intended? Is the environment, the location where we are, safe? Is it suitable and appropriate and respectful? And then what forms of communication methods do we use to be able to get that communication open backwards and forwards, where it's two-way and it is understood as well? So we may need different resources to help us make that happen. That communication we often get external, so the distance between the sender and the receiver can be based on someone's health, their mental health, their physical ability, and their energy level. If someone is vulnerable, experiencing trauma or grief and loss, their mood may be low, and their ability to take on a difficult or a complex conversation. We have to ensure that we have set the scene and we pitch this at a way that they can best hear. Internal could be social setting or an occasion, relationships and values and beliefs. That's internal to us. And then our cultural factors, the language, the words chosen, the actions taken, and the meaning. So we have verbal, written, non-verbal language. Don't just think of language as the spoken word. We communicate lots of different ways. Whether eye contact is considered a social norm for somebody. In some cultures, yes. In others, no. So it's what we see in non-verbal, vocal, our pitch, our tone, and our accent, and how we verbalize, how our choice of words and the actual words which are spoken. So there can be generational differences of, like, I don't get what you're talking about. There could be new words coming up that someone can't make that connection. If we're truly intent on communicating, it is for us to listen to understand and for us to communicate to make sure the information is shared, that we are reaching an understanding. And as the worker, that is completely our responsibility. And if we can't, then we make sure that we put the resources in there to be able to make that happen. For us to work effectively in the community service sector, where a significant part of our work involves interacting with other people and with people from diverse cultures and backgrounds, it is important to understand that our non-verbal messages that other people send us, as well as the non-verbal messages we send to other people. When we look at your skills, part of our assessment checklist in your role play is, did the assessor observe the learner, engage respectfully? Now that can be done with what we say and what we do and how we present, the mood and energy we present with. that vibe, if you've ever walked into a room and you go, oh, I can feel some tension, even though you may not be there. Trust that instinct, because that comes from informed place, that's experience. So it's one method, that sensory method, but a lot of people will pick up on the non-verbal before they can even understand the language. So it must feel safe. Our words must land safely. Our approach must be respectful, unconditional regard, professional boundaries, healthy professional boundaries for you as much as for our clients as well. It's effective if we're each aware of the effect it has on another person. We adapt to suit the other person as the worker. That's our professional role. That we say the right thing at the right time. And we do not use language that offends other people just because it's norm for us. And that we share their feelings, that connection, that empathy. That sounds hard. I don't know what that would feel like. That must be terribly difficult for you. Would be an approach that would build a gap and show that we had respect and we're acknowledging and believing. What happens if that doesn't flow for us? Resolving differences and conflict. Just fix any conflict initially. Think win-win, that everybody is going to get their needs met in that space. You may not be in control of it, but if your intention is there, then that energy will come over into that space over a period of time. So think in a collaborative, cooperative manner to share that problem together, that if there's a problem, that this is also our problem. And thank you for telling me that. What would that look like if I had got it right? And if you are told that you're doing something wrong, help me better understand is the position that we will come from in that case. Uncover their needs with some motivational interviewing questions. And then identify creative solutions that you both can feel comfortable with, that's safe inside the policies and procedures, and still ensures that you've got a healthy professional boundary when you're working with that client. So our diversity could be age, disability, and gender. That can be as simple as men make decisions, women do this, men do that. That could be in that culture, that's how it is. It could be the differences in eye contact, how we meet and greet somebody, shake hands, kiss cheeks, rub noses, depending on your culture and your custom. And then where we touch around that, it can have different meanings for different cultures as well. And there's a video there to unpack some of that for you. So our guidelines show respect. As a worker, ask if you do not know. Do not raise your voice, keep an even tone. Don't trigger the other person to be really heightened. If they are heightened when they come in, how we present ourselves will help that person find their baseline and to be calm in there. You do not need to raise your voice. If someone is, we don't match that. We stay in our baseline, and that's a learned behavior, a learned skill. And we work with language or cultural interpreters to make sure that there's fairness and equity over this space, not assumptions or discrimination, even if it's unintentional. Cultural interpreters are not a suitable person. They're not a substitute. They do not speak on behalf of that person. They are your interpreter of what that person is saying, and you don't talk to the interpreter. You still keep your connection with the client, and then it's up to the interpreter to translate that for you. So your connection remains with the client. That's who you're working with. The only thing is a resource to help you with the language barrier, but otherwise your connection sits with that client. And if it's language is the only barrier, then you make sure you connect in the non-verbal as well, where it's a respectful energy that you take into that space. Some things are not easily translated with that. So information and guidance, it can take maybe one session or more than one session. Okay. And in wrapping up, we have covered what discrimination means in Australia, some history, what our laws are, what our folk laws are, our urban myths, our biases, known and unknown. What is your family history? How much does that influence your lens on the world as well? And then being open-minded to learning a new way and differences to be a better worker in that space as well. Extremely important. Take a short pause. Okay. Wanted to bring you over to your learners portal. What is an assessment for this? And I wanted to bring you through on task 1. So assessment 1 here, where it's got item 1 and that there are 13 questions. So this one is your assessment, often referred to as a quiz in this space here. So there are other assessments here as well, but this one is the first assessment. So task 1 leads to task 2, leads to task 3. So in the very first one, there'll be some language, some wording, some knowledge that will give you your foundation, and then it'll move you into assessment 2, task 2. So there's just a little bit of change in the language there, and given that we're talking about diversity, we're understanding your portal language. When you see in your portal that there's a recording or a class or workshop, those things are all the same. So it's having an understanding. If study is new to you, then it's about finding an understanding and bridging that gap. And if you're unsure, please reach out. But it's going to ask you questions like in question number 1, what is the definition of diversity? And it'll ask you to select one of the following. So this means only one of these will be the correct answer, and that will mark it automatically for you when you submit. You can open up your assessments and you can work on a few at a time. That might be the only time that you've got available. Again, what is the concept? Select one is the question. So select one of those answers and you've got 4 options. But you might come back to this and go save answer. So you can do some work on your assessments and you can save that work and come back to that next time you log in as well. It is when you submit, that means your final submission. If you accidentally submit, someone will mark it and send it back to you. You get 3 attempts. We can look at more attempts. If something has had 3 attempts, that usually flags for us as the assessors that maybe you need a little bit more support, but we can open up more than the 3 attempts. I don't want you to feel that there's any penalty or disadvantage there. There is not. This just flags for us that maybe you need some more support, because with each attempt, the assessor will guide you and give you feedback. So if you answered this question, question 2, what is the concept of diversity in the workplace? And your options are, it means hiring only people with the same background and skills. Diversity in the workplace is about creating a homogenous, like all the same workforce. It involves promoting inclusivity and bringing together individuals from various backgrounds, cultures, and perspectives to foster innovation and understanding. And diversity in the workplace is solely focused on promoting a single perspective and ideology. So for me, this is one clear answer, but for you, it may not be. You'll need to think about the question. One of those, it's saying select one. So one will be correct, the others will not. So if you click on the others, then you will automatically be wrong. It's saying select one of the following. If you do get it incorrect, we will mark it and give you feedback, and we'll say, think about and guide you in that direction. So we want to be as helpful as we can. If it says select 3, we'll say, great start, you have 2 correct, and we'll tell you which 2 they are. But your correct answers in your next submission will automatically transfer over into that space for you. And then you get an opportunity to be able to do the correct answer in your next attempt. Okay, so it's a very user-friendly space in there. Know that we have only correct or incorrect. Some training spaces have a certain percentage as a pass. At HADA and vocational education, you are competent or not yet competent, and we will help you in that space with our feedback. When there's not as a definite black or white answer here, a yes or no, and there's lots of shades of grey in there, sometimes the assessor will look at your other work and go, you know what, I know where they're headed with this. Or we might give you a call and say, look, there's just this one, I can see you stuck on that. Can I just check in with you, and you give me your ideas around that? Or of course you can reach out as well, and to our learner support team who can assist you in that space. So this area here is amazing and very helpful. And I also want you to be able to feel comfortable in that space. I'll stop sharing. And that's a little bit of insight on what it's like to be over into your assessment portal. And if you need some extra guidance around that, but read the questions carefully. They do explain, but make sure that if there's more in that question and it says, what are the principles and the protocols? What are the needs and the wants? That means they're looking for 2 parts to your answer, because there's 2 parts to that question. Often it can be something as simple as that. So I want you to really read those instructions, watch this recording, go through your learner's guide, watch some of those videos and any other resources that we send out as part of your learner kit to be able to help you. This is the conclusion of the unit CHCDIV001. So enjoy your studies, and we look forward to working with you. And thank you, everybody.